back to the channel, everyone. We are going to be talking about the Ravens and what their future looks like and how I still think there's some red flags with this roster, even though they had probably one of the best drafts in the entire NFL. I loved everything they did with this draft. But real quick, before I get into this, I'm just going to try to potentially get some promos. If you want to skip ahead like 30 seconds, I just want to shout out Boxed Lunch. I mean, making some heat. Shout out to Mikasa and the Attack on Titan. I love this shirt. This shirt's super comfy. If they want to sponsor me, if anyone wants to sponsor me, feel free to hit me up on my socials. But we're going to talk about the Ravens here. If that got you to click off, I'm sorry. But let's talk about the Ravens. Specifically, I loved what they did with the draft. Let's talk about the positives. You get Tyler Linderbaum after trading Marquise Brown, your wide receiver one, or presumably your wide receiver one, for a first-round pick who was, I guess, above average wide receiver. I would say more on the lane of average, just a guy that has a lot of speed. And I wouldn't say he was a first-round pick worthy. Now, it'll be kind of interesting because you're trading for a center, and I understand that positional value center is really high on that list when it comes to the offensive line. It's pretty far down on the totem pole, but Tyler Linderbaum looks like a guy that could be the most guaranteed perfect prospect in this entire draft. Way more than Kayvon Thibodeau, way more than Aiden Hutchinson, even more than his own teammate Kyle Hamilton, who is also a Raven. Shout out to both of those guys, and shout out to the Ravens front office for literally just being patient and being savvy with their moves. And I mean, if you get offered a first-round pick for Marquise Brown, I think that's a very good idea to trade that. I mean, I would see Marquise Brown more being a third or fourth round pick, and that's not disrespect to him. I just think the value of a wide receiver like him, you could see that being a better trade versus a first round pick. I mean, we see Davante Adams get a first and a second. Marquise Brown and Davante Adams, that's a bigger gap, way bigger gap, like not Grand Canyon size, but I would say that's a substantial gap for a first and a second versus just a straight first. You know, that's why I have a little bit of a problem with the trade for the Cardinals, and I'll make a Cardinals video pretty soon talking about all their offseason acquisitions and everything involved with that. But I love what they did in the offseason. I think they had a really solid offseason. I just still think there's holes, and when you're going into this AFC in which there's so much talent, there's so many good teams that could potentially make the playoffs, one of these teams is going to be a disappointment. I don't think it's going to be the Ravens. I've been on record on this channel to say that Lamar Jackson is an above average passer, and I've been crucified by some people, and some people have given me credit because it is the truth. If you look at the stats and if you look how he throws the football, it is not as unorthodox as people are trying to make it. Now, he does have some room to grow, and I think he has grown a lot from his rookie season, and we're still talking about a really young quarterback who has accomplished a lot. We have to talk about like how much this guy has accomplished. I mean, he still has an MVP under his belt. I understand he has slowly declined. I don't think it's been as steep of a drop-off as people are trying to make it be. Not to mention, like, let's talk about last year. A lot of people want to look at last year before he got injured and he was out, and they want to try to pin all the problems with the Ravens, which was injuries. I mean, I'll put up on the screen, there's a chart if I can find it, in which like the Ravens were the outlier. They were the anomaly of everything when it came to injuries. They were dismantled. A running team, a team that was dominant in the running game, lost their entire running back room. I mean, it was insane to watch as more timelines and more things were extended, as more guys were injured. I mean, at some point, you can't keep picking up waiver wire running backs because it's just not going to work. And Lamar Jackson had to put a lot on his back, and they were a first seed for a reason until the injuries came in. And then you had Tyler Huntley come in, and a lot of people were getting as crazy as saying Tyler Huntley is a first-round pick worthy trade. That was insane. I mean, I'm not kidding when I say that. Now, whether you agree with that or not, I mean, that was on TikTok. Whether you think TikTok has terrible sports takes, people were saying that Tyler Huntley, because of the performances he was having in that Ravens offense, he should be a first-round pick trade instead of trading for a quarterback this year's draft, which, I don't know, let me know how you feel about that, but I don't think that's a great trade. But I think that Tyler Huntley fits well in the offense because that's Lamar Jackson's offense. It's getting him to be able to make quick reads, and it works. I mean, they were one of the highest winning percentages for a reason. That's why I still have a lot of faith with this team as an organization. I have trust, just like the Steelers. I have trust that this organization is going to figure it out, and they're making smart moves. They're not perfect. By no means are they perfect, because now I don't trust their wide receiver room, and they kept Greg Roman, who is a guy that I am not very high on to begin with. I think they should have fired him after this year. Now, that could be just recency bias, and if you're a Ravens fan, let me know if you agree. But I know from watching Twitter beefs that y'all have with other AFC North fans, y'all hate Greg Roman. I think y'all do hate Greg Roman. Now, tell me if I'm wrong. I will accept that. If I am wrong and Greg Roman is this great offensive coordinator then that y'all love and y'all think y'all should extend, then so be it. But I don't think he is the guy that is the best fit for Lamar Jackson. But I know I went on a whole tangent. I want to talk about the draft picks and some of the free agent moves I like. I'm going to highlight 3 guys that I think were really, really interesting picks. One of them is going to be 2 tight ends that they were drafting and that I really, really think are really interesting. I know I just said really like 4 times, but really I like these guys, and I'm going to talk about a little bit of the red flags, specifically with the wide receiver room in the third part. So it's going to be talking about roughly 3 draft players. I talked about Tyler Linderbaum. It's pretty unanimously known that guy is going to be pretty solid in the NFL. I want to talk about Kyle Hamilton and how he fits with the secondary. I'm going to talk about the tight ends, and I'm going to talk about why I think there is some red flags with this Ravens team, and they're not as much of a lock to make the playoffs as other people think, just mainly because the AFC is that talented. But let's talk about Kyle Hamilton from Notre Dame. For safety at 6'4", Kyle Hamilton is a freak of nature. I think that's pretty unanimously known. A lot of people started to hate on him because he had a slow-ish 40 time. I still think this dude has a ton of range, and I think he's in probably the best situation he could have asked for. I think if he went to the Lions, he would have really struggled, and I think that's where he would have struggled the most, is like on a Lions or a Texans. And I understand he was presumptuously known to be a top 3 pick, but he had fallen out into the 14th overall pick where the Ravens were just sitting pretty, waiting for him to land at their feet. I think that was a pretty solid pick by them. And the reason why I think it fits so well is their secondary. Let's talk about a guy like Marcus Williams, who you can say, oh, well, the Minneapolis Miracle, he can't tackle in the open field. Don't take one moment where a player just makes a mistake. He was a young guy on the New Orleans Saints. He got a bag for a reason. They chose him over Tyrann Mathieu for a reason. Kyle Hamilton. I think Kyle Hamilton now having a guy, a co-star that he can trust and lean into, that allows him to be as free-rangey as possible. This dude in the run defense, his instincts are ridiculous when you see it on film. I mean, this dude flies across the field. Whatever you want to think about his 40 time and his intangibles and his combine numbers, I look at the film right now, this dude was a top 5 talent in this entire draft and landed at 14 for the Ravens. Fantastic snag. Not to mention, you have Marlon Humphrey coming back. Tavon Young, I think, is still on the roster. Now, if I'm wrong, correct me. I'll take that. I think they might need a second corner. I can't remember who is it. I don't think it's Marcus Peters. If it's Marcus Peters and he's healthy, I haven't heard that name in a minute. But obviously, Marlon Humphrey, fantastic corner out of Alabama. They now have 3 guys that I know for a fact are going to be dominant guys on immediate impact. And this is where I think Kyle Hamilton, he might have struggled as a safety on a lesser team because he was going to be asked to do a lot more. Now he's going to, honestly, I don't think he's going to have much of a off switch. I think they're going to really tell him, hey, go make plays and be in zone coverage, be able to come into the box, make plays, get open field tackles. I mean, this dude could honestly lead all secondary players for that team in open tackles. And I think he's going to be a ridiculous talent. This is what makes this defense so good. I have some concerns about the front 7 and Patrick Queen. And there's some concerns there, and they did bring back some bigger guys in the middle to clog up the run defense. But if they still stay healthy, this secondary could be the best in the league. I genuinely believe that, because I think Kyle Hamilton at 6'4", when you have that much size and you're able to move as well as he does, say what you want about that 40 time, he is able to move very fluidly. I think he can get from sideline to sideline as fast as you need it. And I'd be surprised if he busts. I would genuinely be surprised if he turned into a bust, because this dude is a freak of nature, and I think he's honestly remarkable. I know I say remarkable all the time. He's truly, like, he could be one of the greatest safeties in the league. I genuinely believe that, and I've been super high on Kyle Hamilton. I was almost hoping the Seahawks would go get him and go trade Jamal Adams, but I know that was a reach that was never going to be in question. I'm happy we got Charles Cross, but there you go. I got my Seahawks take out of the way. But let's talk about Charlie Kolar and Isaiah Likely. Y'all remember when Coastal Carolina was putting up a bajillion points and they still have their quarterback this past year? Well, he had a favorite target in Isaiah Likely. Jesus. Anyways, Isaiah Likely is not really a tight end. I would say that. And it doesn't fill all the holes that I'm concerned with the wide receiver room, which I'll get to in a minute. But he is definitely a guy that has a lot of good potential. I think for a later round pick, Isaiah Likely is a draft pick that I really like what the Ravens did. I understand that we are talking about 2 tight ends and they have Mark Andrews. I know for a fact that Lamar Jackson likes throwing the tight ends. And Mark Andrews, you're bracing for impact. And also, Charlie Kolar is a much better blocker. He comes from Iowa, and I mean, Iowa pumps out tight ends like it's nothing. And I understand, I'm talking about 2 tight ends on a roster where you potentially have a top 2 tight end in Mark Andrews, depending on where you want to rank him, at least top 3. And it's something that I think is really interesting what the Ravens did. I don't think a lot of people will talk about it because it's like, oh, well, I mean, the tight end's the most secure position for this receiving threat. I think Isaiah Likely could be out wide a lot more than people are realizing. Now, I'm not a fan of Greg Roman. I don't think he will do that, and I don't think his offense is creative enough to do so. And Charlie Kolar is most likely going to be a guy that's going to be on a lot more blocking sets. I think he's a good enough receiving tight end. I think he has a lot of potential. And I think they're bracing, I mean, in a world where they would have to get rid of Mark Andrews and do not want to pay him a lot because they still have to pay Lamar Jackson, I think these are guys that has a ton of upside. I like these picks a lot. I know I'm not talking about them for too long, but I just wanted to point these picks out. I think that someone from this Coastal Carolina squad is going to be good. Now, I don't know if it's going to be McCall, the quarterback that's still in, I believe, at Coastal Carolina. I think he's going to be really interesting to watch. I give a lot of Sun Belt love. I go to a school that is in the Sun Belt, so I give them a lot of love. And I think that Isaiah Likely, from what I see, he still has a lot of talent. I think he has a ton of upside, and he's not really built like he's like built like a big wide receiver. And I think if you put him in some interesting sets, he could be a valuable asset down the line, I think, for the Ravens, honestly. And with Charlie Kolar, he isn't a fantastic blocker to beat right now, but he has the size. This dude is 6'6", 250 plus. He has the size. I think in that offense, when they have so many good tight ends in that room, I think it's either he's going to have to get better at blocking, and he has the size and frame to be one of the best blockers for a tight end. And I think that's a huge deal when you have a running offense like they do. But the problem is with the Ravens, and the biggest red flag, and I think it's pretty apparent a lot of people are talking about, I don't love their wide receiver room. I will go through. I have the Ravens depth chart of right now, and I want to be very clear. They can add OBJ, Julio Jones. Even Jarvis Landry. There's a ton of wide receiver talent. I just need them to do so. And I think a guy like Jarvis Landry or somebody, by all means, Rashad Bateman is a guy that I'm very much high on. I think he's going to be a great wide receiver. But there's still an if. Will he turn into that? We all expected a lot of wide receivers to blow up this year. There's no guarantee that Rashad Bateman, who had dealt with an injury last year, is going to all of a sudden be this wide receiver one. And I think he could fill Marquise Brown's shoes in a slight way. I think he's a much different wide receiver. Marquise Brown is a much smaller, fast wide receiver. I think they could honestly use a smaller slot guy. I think Jarvis Landry would be a good fit. But like looking at this, you have Devin Duvernay, who is a special team god, but he's obviously not this elite wide receiver. James Proche, And then you have Rashad Bateman, Tylan Wallace, Jalen Moore, Slade Baldwin. I mean, for a guy that, like Lamar Jackson, who is still developing and still trying to become a better quarterback, you want to talk about, oh, he's a running back. We're not getting into that debate because he's not. He's a good quarterback. Go watch my video on Lamar Jackson. I'll have it on the top right of the screen. It's one of my most popular videos because I am speaking facts, and I will stand on that. I will stand my ground on that because I still think he's a good quarterback. But you have to give this guy weapons. I mean, look around when we're talking about the AFC. Look at the Chiefs. Look at the Bills. Look at the Chargers. Their weapons are 10 times better than what they have right now. Not to mention, we are banking that the running back room for the Ravens is just going to be all of a sudden way better. I mean, we're talking about a running back room that was dealing with a ton of severe injuries, and they're just going to all of a sudden bounce back for one of the positions where you're going to need a lot of legs. You're going to need a lot of healthy bodies. And I also, on top of it, you have Greg Roman at the offensive coordinator, who I'm just not a fan of. Like, these are big red flags when we're talking about the AFC. I mean, we have to talk about, there's 7 teams that could easily make the playoffs this year. The entire AFC West, I'm talking Raiders, Broncos, Chargers, Chiefs. That's 4. And they all could easily make the playoffs. You have the AFC North, Bengals, Browns. I don't know if I want to count the Steelers, but a lot of people say that they have a good enough team to make the playoffs. But then you have the Ravens themselves. That's 8. And we haven't even mentioned 2 divisions, one of which that has Tua and Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill and the Dolphins defense. Now, I think they're very low on that bottom tier, but I think you could say they could potentially make the playoffs if a couple things go their way. The Bills, you have the Titans, and on top of that, the Colts, who have Matt Ryan, who I think is an underrated signing. There's a lot of teams, and when we're comparing these teams, it gets to the fine numbers of like who has the more talent, who has the weapons. And I don't know if the Ravens have the weapons to automatically get into the playoffs. I don't think there's an automatic team that's going to guarantee to make the playoffs, other than maybe the Chargers, the Chiefs, and things like that. But like, they do not have the weapons to keep up, and that's what concerns me. I think they have a good enough defense that could maybe slow things down, but if they get in a shootout, I think Lamar has the capabilities to take over a game. But when things get cold and we're in a playoff game, I don't know if, like, we're banking on Devin Duvernay. They need to make a signing. I think that's a huge red flag for this team. I love what the Ravens did in this draft. I think they did a fantastic job this entire offseason, but they have a 1 or 2 more moves that they got to make, and if they really want to make a deep push into the Super Bowl. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. We are on the road to 1,000 subscribers. I'm really trying to reach that goal, guys, and we have till the end of summer. We are on a grind. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think about the Ravens and what their next season can be. The NFL schedule is about to come out soon, so be prepared. I might have to redo a bunch of videos where I'm talking about teams. You might get a second Ravens video where I talk about their schedule predictions, and I'm just going to get out as many videos as possible. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day.